Thank you, Neil. Maybe one of the leading voices, because a few of my competitors and colleagues are in here, but just to be diplomatic. Good morning, I'm Jim Mullen. I want to thank Sarah and Bill for inviting me to speak at this event. And today it's just going to be me with some of my thoughts. There isn't any slides, and I just want to explain some of the challenges and why we're working together within the industry and with the Gambling Commission is the best route for us all. Now first, I just want to make a personal admission. I like gambling, and I feel lucky to be in this industry. In fact, I feel privileged to be the Chief Executive of Ladbrokes Coral, but I also feel the weight of responsibility that lies on my shoulders, my executive team, my colleagues and my board. Now, I started my interest in gambling, and I'm very careful about these words, but I started when I was a child. Growing up watching my grandparents filling out their Saturday bets on Pat Edery and Lester Piggott and watching Grandstand and World of Sport. And for them, it was the downtime. It was a Saturday routine. The stakes were never high, and therefore the losses were small and manageable. And it is worth being honest here. There were more losers than winners. It's why bookmaking exists, and it's why we have survived for centuries. Now, the winnings were celebrated, not excessively, more tea and cake, maybe a couple of cans of McEwan's Export for my grandfather, iron brew for me. But these were times where we bonded through gambling in the community and betting. Therefore, it was no issue for me that when I was a student, I ended up working in the very shop that my grandfather used to bet in, working 1 or 2 days over 5 years through university, and watching people bet, enjoy the camaraderie, and treat it what it genuinely was, which was a community hub. And that shop where I worked, actually, of all the shops that are there are only 2 shops that are still there over 20 years ago, which is the butcher and the betting shop in the village where I was brought up. Now, I don't tell you this to try and make a point about gambling being harmless fun, because I realise for some that it is not. Now, I've worked in some really challenging areas in the East End of Glasgow, in the Port of Leith, and I realise some of the challenges my colleagues have to go through and some of the issues our customers have to deal with. But I'm trying to explain why I feel so passionate about the right of this industry to exist, and why I genuinely get annoyed at some people who don't bet or ever visit a shop, criticising the right of us as bookmakers to exist, or the way that our customers actually use these shops. This background was why I was interested when Hills first approached me to join Henry to run the online business. And it was also why I moved to Ladbrokes to run the online team. And I was honoured to ask to be the Chief Executive of Ladbrokes and then Ladbrokes Coral, because of this passion I have for the industry, but also just to assure the Gambling Commission in this audience the impact that gambling can have, both good, challenging and bad. So please forgive me if during this session my passion gets a wee bit the better of me, because I believe our right to exist and the rights of our customers to bet and to choose which products they wish to gamble on, and also the rights of 24,500 Ladbrokes Coral employees and many more in the gambling sector who have a proper employer with regular pay and benefits. And please don't underestimate how valued these are in this increasingly gig economy, where pay and benefits such as holidays are not always guaranteed. However, I also recognise that my colleagues and I have a duty to provide a safe environment for our customers and our colleagues to work in, a duty to provide a range of products that are fair, safe, easy to understand and easy to use. And importantly, a duty to provide an environment where we can help people when they let what should be an enjoyable pursuit become something else, or spot people using gambling as a means to pursue an illegal activity. In fact, these are the duties that, amongst all of my responsibilities as Chief Executive, keep me awake most at night. So after admitting that I love gambling, and I genuinely do, here's another shocking revelation. I think we need to be a regulated sector. And when I say regulated, I mean tightly regulated. And don't mistake that thinking for I agree with everything that comes from Westminster or even from Birmingham. I don't. But I do believe in regulation, and it has to be a pillar around which your sector is built. Competition in our market is fierce, probably the fiercest it's ever been. And while people usually argue that it is in the best interests of the customer, we have to accept that we are talking about gambling, and gambling should be a fun leisure pursuit. Not a problem, because it can be, and we need a referee on the pitch. And I'm delighted that the chief referee is actually in here and has invited me to speak, because competition is intense. The desire to succeed means corporates or individuals may seek to push the boundaries, often not thinking they are stepping over them, that they are gaining a tiny advantage. Of course, what that does is create a herd mentality, and we've seen it. An attitude of, well, if they are doing it, then why shouldn't we? Because the margins are small. The result is that a strain on the boundary means that some start going further and further over it. And you'll have seen by some of the fines that the Gambling Commission have dispensed that that has been the case. So someone has to step in and reinstate the boundary and then police it. If it can be even bolder, I think it has to be a direct and forceful action. It needs to be the equivalent of a yellow card. And why? Because the call for voluntary action sees too many take different approaches and, more importantly, move at different speeds. The result is an uneven practice. Customers getting different levels of service on even basic matters, and a frustration from some players that others are getting away with it. Even worse, the sector gets caught up in trying to act in unison, but only ever moving at the pace of the slowest. And that is the real problem. For us, that is the real problem to solve, but solve it we must. If this scenario is a sporting match, it would be the one where the commentators would say the referee is losing control and needs to get a grip. And that is why, painful although it has been, the recent focus led by the Gambling Commission on advertising in particular has been necessary. While we have not always agreed with the ASA criticism of some of our adverts, on the whole, it has been significant in helping us change the culture in our business around advertising. The CMA investigation, which is ongoing, has only reinforced this sense for a need for change. And I hope you realise that even though I am passionate about gambling, I realise some of the gaps, significant gaps that we have. You will understand that there tends to exist in businesses a mindset that evolves from the belief that because others are doing it then and have done it in the past, then it must be all right to do in the future. This is a hard mindset to break. It is the groupthink, the culture of large organisations, and it takes something significant to shake it loose. Now, this is not for me to try and downplay the current ongoing discussions about marketing. The CMA process is painful and incredibly burdensome for any organisation, but it's right. However, we accept that we had let the Ladbrokes brand go too far. It would not be authentic for me to stand here today and not admit a level of mea culpa. So I'm doing this. Although we let it go too far, even if it had not been intentional, we did not try and hide in the anonymity that we were not one of the companies involved, because trust is often built by what you do in adversity and not in good times. And we felt it was important, as did our board, that we were transparent and owned up to being a brand that was involved in these activities. Now, the impact of our engagement will be felt by the whole industry, but that's a good thing. Things had gone too far, and the industry needs to understand that red lines now need to exist. A customer wanting a false promise is not a long-term viable or valuable customer, and just because others are doing certain things, we need to stop thinking that it was right for us to do. And as a man who believes in the free market and the use of capital, it was not in the commercial sense good for business. And while we're on the subject of advertising, I think that within the industry, many of us do worry that there is too much, although I would tend to say that we are not yet aligned. We think that the public may be overexposed. And that does not mean that I think we shouldn't advertise, but perhaps volume-wise, we have gone too far. This is why when we helped to create Senate, we took the voluntary action of ensuring that there was some degree of responsible gambling messaging in our adverts. It was why we ended the free offer of money before the watershed, and why we took machines out of our shop windows, and we recognised that we had to act. Now, not everyone in the business was happy. The feeling was we were giving away valuable ground to our competitors, who would still advertise sign-up offers at half-time in Super Sunday or in the racing. And you know what? They were right. We were giving up ground, back to the point that moving at the pace of the slowest. Now, what was surprising and a touch disappointing was that it took so long for voluntary action, for this to be recognised as probably a decent code for others to follow, and it was nearly a year before it became the code for everyone to follow through on. So I completely support the views that Sarah has just spoken about. The issues we have to address is that the market is so competitive. It doesn't naturally shift on its axis on a voluntary basis, and perhaps only moves very slowly on that basis. It has to be led, and once led, it needs encouragement to comply and encouragement to evolve. And I'm sure many of you think it odd that the CEO of a company who has a brand engaged in dialogue with the CMA over its advertising standards, and who recently had a Gambling Commission case made public for other operators to learn from, is up here saying today that the market needs guidance. But I know that I am always at risk from being the CEO of a company, particularly a public company, that is publicly named and shamed by the Gambling Commission on matters of responsible gambling and identifying crime. This is simply the factor of the scale of our business, not an excuse, simply the factor of a scale of our business, and the fact that we will always rely on human interaction to interpret a process. And again, I say to Sarah and Bill, these are not excuses. We are aspiring to ensure that the delegation of these processes can be carried out consistently. We can never be an industry where all decisions are made by a computer. It can only ever guide us. Therefore, there is always a risk that we will get it wrong, but we are aiming to reduce that and eventually to nil. But I think when that does happen, it is right that we are held to account when we make mistakes. And let me assure you that being public with our failings is an uncomfortable experience for any business. It is extremely uncomfortable when I had to explain it to my board, and not an experience I want to go through again, notwithstanding the impact on our customers. But we believe that it is right that others can see the extent of our mistakes and try to learn from them. Now, this attitude comes directly from the board of Ladbrokes Coral, because we recognise that running a gambling company carries a huge responsibility to ensure that it is done so in a safe and responsible manner. The sector has obligations to look to help customers help themselves and protect the vulnerable, where self-help is evidently not going to happen. Now, there'll be more on this later, because even as I say this, I realise it is such a difficult and hazardous and sometimes an emotional subject. I can assure you that the Ladbrokes Coral business has moved on since these cases, and the view of the board and the management is that there can be no shortcuts on delivering our social responsibility and anti-money laundering obligations. We talk genuinely of putting responsible gambling at the heart of our business, and cases like this rightly demonstrate that words alone do not guarantee success. As I said earlier, with a business of this size and scale, we will always be at risk of inadvertently failing to follow the right procedures. This is why we must continue to invest in technology, people, research and education to have the highest standards of social responsibility, and from a practical operational sense, to get the drill and the cadence in the business that this is our priority going forward. I would like to touch on some of the challenges of putting responsible gambling and health and safety at the heart of the business. So how did we do that? As I've said, words don't work, and we have to make it part of everyone's role, so it starts from the top. To start that process, we have been linking responsible gambling to executive remuneration. We have been using our Performance Share Plan Award, or PSP, to do this, and this is significant because the aim of the PSP is to align executives and broader senior management with shareholders to deliver long-term success for the business. Our history on targets is that they have been in place since 2014. At first, we look at setting specific targets to help us improve in our operational performance. They were based around input measures aimed at increasing the focus on responsible gambling throughout the business and building upon those foundations. Now, while we have resisted in naming specific targets in our annual report, it is for a number of reasons, in particular the precedent it would set around disclosing more commercially minded targets and how they have related to aims such as delivering multi-channel view of the customer and a one way of treating and identifying customers. We're obviously expecting to exceed industry norms in these performance areas, but some of the targets are commercially sensitive. But let me be clear, we don't reward for delivering against expected performance norms on regulatory issues, and we will deduct from any award, both personally as I stand here, for failure against regulatory issues. And I can say personally the recent Gambling Commission dispensation has had that impact. We should be looking to reduce the number of customers in our business displaying potential problem gambling behaviours, or only be interested in the ones who spend the most money. Should I strive to achieve my target by targeting one high-spending customer at the expense of 9 much lower-spending customers? Now, you may say that they're all important, and I agree that they are, but the journey towards favouring the more valuable player already seems to be in motion, and it makes me feel slightly uncomfortable. And now, I don't profess to know the answer, but I do know that the algorithms we are building look at behavioural change, not spending power. So my instinct, and this remains to be proved, my instinct is when it comes to building trust with customers, we should be looking to tackle the number of problem gamblers and not creating a cohort that targets them by their spending power. As the RGSB said in their recent advice, problem gamblers are found at all levels of staking. So we'll keep you posted on how this develops, and of course, we will be engaging the Gambling Commission on our work. What is clear, though, is that we are on a journey to a long-term remuneration target linked to responsible gambling. We have started taking steps, and we will look to try and establish a link which can be shared and left to people to decide if it is for them or not, and that means the executives within the business. As an industry, we have a duty to align around common goals and aims, and the reason being it helps build a consistency for our customer and whoever they choose as their betting provider. The more we are all working in the same way, with simple rules all being applied consistently, then the better for the customer. It allows us as a sector to focus our competition on product and value, not in other areas like the ease of the signing up process or the decision when to interact with a customer via CRM. The Gambling Commission has a role to play in that process. The Gambling Commission have a right to step in where they see concerns and steer the sector. In fact, Enlightened will welcome this, but it's not all rosy. I'm not going to complain about regulation, but that doesn't mean that I always agree with what the Gambling Commission say. I see a few issues where I would challenge that the thinking of all of us needs to be questioned. Aside from the internal debate about percentage of income versus the number of customers, the following caused me to question the best way ahead. And I hope that the audience and the Gambling Commission today and the audience realise this debate is important to move forward with the main aim of improving our levels of social responsibility. Card play, or more specifically the use of cards in retail to attract customers, and let me be honest, I am dead against this. I am dead against mandated card play, particularly when talked about for only one type of product. As has been the case in the machines debate, but I do appreciate that if a customer who I can track in retail, I can deal with them far more effectively from a social responsibility point of view. Yet I know that unless customers have a reason to record their play, they actually, in reality, prefer not to. Customers on the whole, in particular in certain cohorts, value anonymity. And we've tried to do it before. We've seen it with Boots Advantage card or a Costa's Reward card. But the truth is, it is incredibly expensive and for some cohorts, not that popular. However, if they do have to use it, then there is an incentive to do so. In terms of what it allows us to do to identify player behaviour, it is a positive step. The challenge I am raising is that some customers simply block this process. The other thing I would like to say is that card play also, and let's be honest, could mean access to higher stakes. Now that could be a win-win situation for those customers who can afford to bet at higher stakes and are willing to bet via card play. However, it looks like in the recent triennial consultation as though that may not be the thinking. And it is a regret, so I fear, for every pound that is cut in the triennial review, we are driving a nail into card play. That then has another consequence, because that means the expectation will be on to more tracking of customers who are not giving their consent to be tracked. And that leads me to question about the rights to privacy. I am not stating this to defend a position. I am stating the challenges that as an operator of 3,700 shops with anonymous users that we face, particularly when there has been a growth in customers looking for their personal information and the data that we hold with them. As someone like me with a small and quite undeserved public profile, I sympathise with a person's right to privacy. Yet in our sector, the drive to look after the customer means we need a deep understanding of customer behaviour. I understand the principles of aggregated data, but more tracking and more intervention relies on clever algorithms, and we have to make sure we have the skills to deliver that. We also have to make sure we have the skills to respond to customers who wish to see which data that we hold on them, even though they may not have explicitly subscribed. So how much data can I take? How am I meant to keep data on a customer who wants to be anonymous? And what do I have to make them aware of if they challenge me or my colleagues about it? If we look at our obligations, which the government department I am meant to decide takes precedent, who is it? Who has the precedence over the right to privacy? And all that the GDPR brings under gambling regulatory expectations. As I said, problem gambling is not about the size of your wallet, it's about the changes in your behaviour. And to spot that, you need to know a lot about the customer. When they're anonymous and want to remain so, this is a difficult bridge to gap, particularly in retail. And I stress once again, this is not meant to be a defensive argument, but for us to appreciate the challenges we have, particularly in that retail sector. Now, I mentioned earlier that the sector has an obligation to look to help customers help themselves and protect the vulnerable. Well, self-help is evidently not going to happen, and sometimes that can be a difficult and hazardous subject. The truth is we can spot people. We can identify customers on a troublesome journey, and we can interact. But interacting is not as simple as some may assume. Some customers simply don't want our help. In fact, they can be aggressive and rude, they can be intimidating, and it can put our colleagues in a position of risk. Others may go out their way to break a self-imposed gambling cancellation and perhaps blame other people or our processes for personal failure. Again, I stress, this is not a defensive conversation, but to highlight some of the challenges we have in the retail sector in 2017. Now, these reasons could be many and multifaceted of why people do not wish to participate, but at the end, we still rely on a person, a colleague in a shop to interact. And an instruction is easy to issue in paper, but difficult sometimes to see through in practice, particularly in some of the challenging areas where we operate. It is an area where more that can be centralised, the better, but the person still needs to be told and delegated of the process that they need to follow without putting our colleagues at risk. Hard stops in language like that can have unintended consequences that as a chief executive I have experienced personally myself and with my colleagues, and these need to be thought through before they are jumped on as the only and preferential solution. Now, please don't get me wrong. I and my industry colleagues accept the role we have to play in coming up with the answers. But back to the main theme. I think it can be something that we can do better. We accept Sarah's challenge that we have to put forward solutions, and we also accept the position that good is not good enough. Now, finally, important point. Last year, Ladbrokes paid taxes, levies and duties of over £650 million into the UK economy. In the UK alone, we paid 650 million taxes. In the UK alone, we paid 550 million, over £500 million. We spent 2.3 million on research, education and treatment, not all at Gamble Aware, but a sizable chunk to them. We completely support the 0.1%, and personally I think that's not enough. I don't mind a statutory levy because I think people should pay. I do, however, wonder, in a sector that contributes probably around 4 billion in taxes, why only voluntary donations support treatment. Surely in campaigning for a 0.1% levy, we are missing the bigger picture. The need to ensure that some of our tax take helps fund treatment for those who need it most. But that is probably enough for me. If I leave you with just 3 things from today, it would be, we love our profession, and it's one thing that Britain is great at. Replace gambling with risk management. And if you take it that way, for this country to be the best in the world at that profession, I think it's something we should be proud of. But we're not blind to the journey that we need to go on. We would rather work with you, the Gambling Commission and associated bodies, to achieve great things together, but nothing is easy, and there are difficult decisions that need to be made. Stability is the best foundation to build on, and if we can get everyone to make this journey, the rewards are even better. If we have time, I'd like to answer some questions, but I'd like to give you the assurance that Ladbrokes Coral are fully committed and support the Gambling Commission's strategy over the next 3 years. Thank you.
So I think there's time for a couple of questions, and we have some roving mics. So if people have questions that they'd like Jim to answer following that really interesting speech, that would be ideal. If you could just